Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to talk about learning impossible pieces through microscopic strategy, example 2. I did make another video with the same title a while ago with a different example of different students' music. Basically, I'm just positing here that through extremely granular strategic decision making, sometimes pieces, dream or goal pieces that seem years out of reach truly might be attainable right now. They seem impossible, but really they're possible now. Now, of course, there's a certain limit to it. It's not that you can learn any piece of music right now, but through traditional means, what might take several years, practicing scales, studying theory, practicing finger exercises, etc., we may be able to greatly shorten the time through more intelligent strategy and decision making. And on this channel, I hope to share with you strategies, thoughts, insights, methods, etc., often of my own creation that hopefully will help you in your piano playing, hopefully even other areas of your life as well. So I'm just going to jump straight into this example from Liszt's Un Sospiro. Forgive my inaccurate Italian pronunciation probably. So I have a student who is practicing this piece, and actually I guess I almost always have a student who's practicing this piece. And initially when she'd started with this piece, she struggled because she was trying to practice in what she thought were smaller sections. It could be one or two measures at a time, could be a line at a time, and so on. But if we look at the music here, I think you'll be able to quickly see, maybe you know the music already. I mean, even one measure or two measures, I mean, it's very, very involved. I think what's important to realize is that there are situations where the music is so difficult that even one measure or two measures, it's actually quite a large chunk of music. Like it could be equivalent to the same as like 8 or 10 measures in another piece. And I'm just looking through my notes here just to make sure I don't miss anything. Because it's so much more complex, it makes sense to break things down much smaller, even if people don't typically do this. And so for instance, in another piece of music, it could be that what we just saw represented in 2 measures or so, it would be the equivalent of like 8 measures or even 12 measures or something. And so it makes sense to break it down that much smaller. And in this case, this student already did break things down more using my logical methodology. I'm not going to go on and on about the logical methodology here. You can search David Chang, 14 Layers of Strategy, look at that playlist on my channel, and or look at my logical methodology playlist on the channel. And there's also other videos as well that describe my notational system here. But basically, the notational system, curly brackets refers to both hands, so these are all both hand sections. It's always referring to the number of measures contained within the bracket plus the following note. And so for those that are less advanced, it might be difficult to tell visually, but this student practiced quarters of a measure. So the number of measures is actually just a single quarter of a measure, like a fourth of a measure. And so it would be, in this case, a quarter of a measure. Oops, I need to use a larger highlighter. It'd be quarter of a measure plus the next note or plus the next beat. So that's what would be represented by this quarter sign. Actually, let me go ahead and erase these for a moment. This was actually even more intricate strategy that we were utilizing. So let me go ahead and highlight. So this would be the first quarter of the measure. Let me see if I can do this while holding my hand here at the same time. This would be the second quarter of the measure. And this would be the third quarter. And then this would be the fourth quarter. And so the curly brackets, it's always referring to the quarter of a measure plus the next note. So technically the curly brackets, it's not just the yellow. It's the yellow and then the first note or first chord of the red. And then this quarter measure set marker, it means both hands within these brackets. It's referencing this red quarter of a measure plus the first note of the blue. Same thing with the blue. It's all of the blue plus the first of the green. And here's all of the green plus the first chord of the following measure, the white over here. And when we mark these markers, it just means that we've done them to quality, which is of course a subjective measurement. So we've done it like perfect note, perfect in quotes notes, rhythm, no stopping at all. And ideally it's from memory, very nice and solidly. So you can also search for David Chang, like what I mean by quality. I think there's a video about that if you want more nuance around those lines. So even this, it shows you that while maybe normal people might practice, an entire line, or if they had even the insight to do that, or a single measure, like we can actually break things down much smaller. So the student may be practicing just one quarter on their own, and that's the reason for the notational system. This is if they did it even once to quality from memory, nice and solid, then they mark a quarter, and this way they can keep track of their work. And you can see that this student of mine did use my system, sometimes even broke things down smaller, and some of this might be broken down in a way, like I would do it slightly differently. Maybe I would have broken this into like eighths rather than twelfths, just because of the way that the music's broken down. But in any case, the student's practicing in a more granular fashion in her music. And before I go any further, even this, it will produce better results than if she just practices in entire measures or even half measures, just by virtue of her focusing on smaller sections and starting with more doable problems. Each of these can also be split up even smaller, and they can be broken up separate hands and everything as well. So I'll show you some examples of, so let's say like the student practices those quarter measure sets, and I write a set as, again, a quarter of a measure plus the next chord, quarter of a measure plus the next chord, like I was demonstrating earlier. And let's say that there's not even any more sophisticated strategy than that. It's not even any more granular or microscopic than that. They just do that. Maybe that already solves their problem, even if it's kind of mindless, even if they play from the beginnings of those quarters of a measure over and over again. I'm not even satisfied with that a lot of the time. So if I can turn this around, let me erase this so I'm actually going to mark the start and end points of each of these quarter measure sets. So let me go ahead and do that. I think I'll use a regular pencil or marker here. Okay, so we'll use these circles to represent the quarter measure set markers. Okay, this ended up like a little bit of a cloud or something. Okay, so it's a little bit, sorry if it's a little bit hard to see, but these circles here, so you got to play from circle to circle, circle to circle in order to get these quarter measure sets. So you want to play perfectly from there to there, even a single time. And if you search like David Chang's spaced repetition, I'm sure you'll find videos where David Chang forgetting on purpose. You'll find out why we actually want to do these little tiny areas and then just leave them rather than try to link them together, because it will lead to better long-term retention, deeper learning, etc., rather than doing massed over and over again repetition. So in order even to just get these quarter measure sets, we're likely going to use our default strategy of adding in reverse, separate them both for each step. And those were some of the colors that you saw earlier. So for example, even just to play from this circle to this circle, I'm not going to just play from the beginning over and over again mindlessly. Like I'm not going to do both hands at the beginning and then mess up the ending and do that again and again. Instead, first of all, I might do right hand alone and then left hand alone and then both. But I might also go smaller. I might actually start from here. I might do this last eighth of a measure, or this eighth measure set, eighth of a measure plus the following note, just right hand, eighth of a measure plus the following note, just left hand, and then both. So that's 3 steps so far. And then I may go from the beginning of the quarter measure set, I might play right hand alone from here to here, left hand alone from here to here, and then both. And I might even alternate between this area, the blue, and this area, the green. And I might construct it separate than both for each step, or I might just stay within both once I've completed that initial construction. So I can alternate and cycle between these different lines, this whole 6-step process, or maybe even just this 2-step process between the both for the blue and the both for the green. All of this within this quarter measure frame just to get this single time from quality, from memory. Then I would mark that and then move on to the next one. So that might be the default strategy for solving all of these. It might be that the default way of solving quarter measure sets is adding eighths in reverse separate than both for each step. So it's the same thing from this circle to this circle, rather than just playing from this circle to this circle mindlessly over and over again, or even doing right hand and then left hand and then both. I might do the last eighth, right hand alone, and then left hand alone, and then both, and then I might do the whole thing, right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both. Now, for this student, sometimes I also brought up the idea of adding even just single notes. So if you want really microscopic strategy, if the quarter measure set were too difficult to get, and we want to go even more granular, I mean, we can practice even smaller. If I mark, let's say, eighths of a measure, and why do we want to do this? Because let's say that you couldn't play these sections of Un Sospiro with, an entire measure plus the next beat. You couldn't do it with halves. Maybe even the quarters are too difficult. And let's say that you happen to be somebody that doesn't have too much trouble with separate hands. Because if you had trouble with separate hands, you could still start with small separate hand areas, like quarters of a measure separate hands, eighths of a measure separate hands. Let's assume you can do separate, but you can't do both. You're at least an intermediate-ish student. And this is the case for a lot of people. So in this case, since you can do separate, but you can't do both, we can mark like these eighth measure set markers. So maybe these little purple swirls, this can represent eighth measure sets here, if I can do this correctly. Okay. So if I can play from here to here, this would be an eighth of a measure plus the next note, an eighth of a measure plus the next note, eighth of a measure plus the next note, etc. And so even to play from here to here, this purple swirl to this purple swirl, which would include like these notes on the right, these notes on the left, let's try to break that down. So I might start like within this eighth measure set, which is this entire area, right? An eighth of a measure plus the next note. That's the purple swirl to purple swirl. I may do the last 24th measure set. So this is because these are sextuplets. So these within a quarter of a measure, if we split that into 6, of course, like we have basically 24ths of a measure, since 4 times 6 is 24. So that means within this eighth, these are actually 24th measure sets. This eighth of a measure is further subdivided into 3 equal parts. So we might do just the last 24th measure set, right hand, and then left hand, and then both. Okay, and now we might do, let's see, I think this is the last 12th measure set, right hand, and then left hand, if my math still serves me, and then both. Okay, and then finally, we might actually then do the entire eighth measure set, right hand, and then left hand, and then both. So it's a 9-step process, adding 24th measure sets in reverse, separate, and then both for each step, just to get the result of an eighth measure set, an eighth here. Okay, so the first time that the student goes through this, they may do what it is that I did, assuming they could do the separate to begin with, and then we'd end up with a slew of like eighth measure set markers like this. And it could be that there's some eighths and some quarters. That's the reason partially the notational system is so helpful. You can keep track of all of your work. And then the next time through, after they've had some time to pass, they come back and then they would use this same strategy. And I won't go into here just so I don't end up talking for hours. They would link the eighths into quarters, and then some time would pass, then they would come back, and then they would link the quarters into halves, and then some time would pass, they come back, and they link the halves into ones, and so on. So that is what makes practicing a piece like this that seems like it could be impossible for a given student. How we can use this hypergranular decision making to make it so that even an intermediate-ish, I mean, it's all relative, right? What even is it, intermediate, advanced, etc., that they could attempt to play this. And it is possible for them to do it. They don't only have to go through traditional means, even though that might help too. Of course, it may help to do scales and theory and finger exercises. But let's say that there's a certain student that's more advanced. They can start by practicing like 1 measure sets, 1 measure plus the following beat. Hopefully they're using strategy, and they can start working and memorizing this piece, working on and memorizing this piece right away. Another student, 1 or 2 tiers below the first student, not quite as advanced, maybe intermediate advanced. They really want to learn this piece though. They don't want to wait like 3-4 years before they can play this. So if they used my strategy, the strategy I was talking about earlier in the video, and they practiced quarters of a measure or quarter measure sets, quarter of a measure plus the next beat, they might add in reverse separate then both for each step. They might add eighths of a measure in reverse, last eighth separated them both, and then the entire quarter separate them both, that might be the way that they can start tackling this piece. And then eventually, using my methodology, the pieces can then link together. And then finally, a third type of student, assuming they can do separate hands, and that was the really, really specific strategy I was just talking about just now, maybe even the quarter measure sets are too difficult, but I still have a path for them. If they practice eighth measure sets by adding 24th measure sets in reverse, separate them both for each step, like I was just showing with all the colors, that could be the narrow path there. And you might think that there aren't people that would want to do that, but there are. I mean, whether it's my students or students in some of our other wonderful programs here. So there are adults that are really thriving on strategy and logic and science. And of course, that's not all that music is, but a lot of them are thrilled that they can play the pieces that they've always wanted to play years earlier than normal, literally just by teaching them more attentive, more specific, more granular strategy and nuance. So hope you found this interesting, and let me see if there's anything else I forgot to talk about. Let me know if you have any questions also. I know that's kind of a lot of information. If you want a lot more context around this, then I would look at my logical methodology playlist on the channel and look through other videos where, of course, you see like the notation system that I'm using in the thumbnail that I've created. So yeah, but if you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, let people know about the channel, and looking forward to the next one.